Welcome everybody to Contractuo podcast, episode number 24,
The one and only.
the one and only. A very chilling episode.
Yep.
Literally, it's so cold.
Freezing conditions here in the Netherlands, specifically in the church.
In the church, and we already have the heaters turned on, but
And it's still freezing cold because
yeah,
this building was not meant to retain heat at this location that we're in right now,
yep.
because the windows are all super old glass and it's super thin. So no matter how you turn the heating, it will just
To just suck it up, and it's gone.
exactly. So right now we're in tolerable conditions.
It's actually way better than the one, I don't know, like 4 months ago, 4 weeks ago, I think when we were here, cold turkey, and started, recording something. That was like super bad, but now it's actually kind of okay.
But it's colder outside than it was then. So
Oh, that's for sure. That's true. Yeah.
Anyway, temperature issues aside,
but glad to have you back.
Yeah.
I definitely would like to talk to you today, rushing immediately into the topic with, let's say, a very recent topic we have, or at least this week,
that was a
which is
relevant one.
Yeah, which is mainly about Git and Git repositories and all of that.
Source control.
Source control. That's a better name. That's true. Yeah. Source control. The importance of it, maybe the the basics,
practices,
the best practices, and maybe also the advanced topics. Let's say that we also leverage.
I'm not sure they're super advanced, but
yeah, but you know what I mean. It's like
a bit more than basic pulling and pushing, but yeah.
Yeah, correct. And that's basically what I would like to talk to you about. Why? Because this week was kind of special for us, because with the start of the new year, let's say it like this, a lot of providers and a lot of let's say tool facilitators, or you call it.
You can call it that.
Decide to change up.
They
plans
decided to rethink their planning approach.
Yeah. So it caused us also to move into a separate repository, to our own repository, which makes me very happy. But it also comes with a lot of downsides and upsides and things that you have to obviously...
Well, it's mostly just work you have to do, not necessarily upside or downside, but just things change and they require you to change with them. So,
but these are things, like upsides and downsides.
Yeah, well, it's more like just things to do.
It's true. But yeah, let's start maybe first. What is source control, Eduardo? Why do you need this? What is it all? What is the fuss about?
What is this magic word?
Yeah.
That people probably don't even know because they just use Git and then they don't call it anything else other than Git. So
that's correct.
Right. Well, let's say, to put it very simply for the folks that are not super tech based, it's basically a big OneDrive or a big Google Drive. So it's like the nerdy version of a of a file storage solution. So in there you have, of course, it's way more powerful than that. I'm just oversimplifying, right? But the idea is, for the known programming folks, that you have this central location where people can collaborate and work in the same repository, as we call it. So it's just like the code base, the place where you have all your files. That's all the code base is. It's just like a location with all your files.
Yeah.
And it facilitates the collaboration of people working in these same files. Because if you have worked with other people in these like shared folders or things across the web, for example, if you're editing a Word document or something similar, you might have run into the issue of opening a file, changing something, and someone else had changed it on their own. And then once you both, let's say, submit your version, you run into conflicts, and then you have to fix those conflicts and so on. So this is a very common thing when you're dealing with programming, because, well, everyone is constantly changing things left and right with different files.
Definitely.
And these files sometimes overlap, and sometimes you change one thing that doesn't necessarily relate to the task that the other person was doing, but they're both using the same original, let's say, files.
It's basically what you guys can imagine as like it's always you always work on the same files on the
Yeah.
surface, but what the source control does is, let's say, a magic that it applies histories and
Yeah,
always.
it's literally magic. Because if you ask me to explain like the intricacies and how that stuff works in the background, I wouldn't be able to tell you. But let's say the nice thing is that it prevents all of these conflicts and these
Mhm.
issues that you would have if you were to work with this without source control solutions. So like I said in the beginning, most people will just call it Git because that's the most popular one. So if you've heard of GitHub, GitLab, or any of the other Git solutions, they're all using Git as the source control engine, if you can call it. I'm
Yeah, well,
not
Git
sure.
is basically the program, let's say it like
Yeah,
that, the driver that
exactly.
is
It's like,
facilitating the functionality.
yeah.
And
So
yeah.
let's say the idea is that locally, you would create this Git repository, as they call it. So it's nothing more than just a directory, like a folder in your computer.
Mhm.
And once you initialize this as a Git repository, you start tracking changes,
Mhm.
and you have this whole, let's say, historical approach where every change you make, you not only have to make the change, but you also have to commit those changes.
Mhm.
And once that commit is made, as the word says, it's committed. So it's like let's say it's marked as a point in time.
Yep.
And again, this is another nice thing, which is that with this history of commits, so once you start committing multiple things, if there's ever a problem or there's something you want to, let's say, return back to,
Mhm.
you can always revert your history
Mhm.
back to that point in time, and it's easier to control. Let's see.
But basically, what's also very nice, what you mentioned, is you commit something, and maybe for the user to for the listeners to know, once you commit, what also happens is that Git basically will track the changes, like you said, but in a way that you can always spot the differences,
Yes,
right? So
it marks that point in time so that your new changes will always be shown in regards to the latest commit.
correct.
So you can more easily see, like, you can more easily, let's say, encapsulate your work,
Mhm.
right? So first of all, we're talking very basic Git, not branching and none
No.
of the other stuff. So just
That
like
we will
basic
go.
single branch Git.
Yeah.
So if you have this commit, you've now finished it, and now you're, let's say, changing new things. All your new changes will show as a difference.
Yep.
They call it like a diff, right? So it will show the difference from the current changes that you have to the latest commit.
One. Yeah.
So you can more easily encapsulate. So for example, let's say you're trying to work on a certain functionality.
Or I have typos again. So
and for this new functionality, you make the changes, and then you say, I'm done. So you commit and you mark that as finished, let's say. And then you continue working on other things. So everything is correctly encapsulated. And like I said, if there's ever an issue or there's something you would like to return back to,
you can
always revert, and it's more easy. It's easier to track, let's say, where things are in the timeline, let's say.
Yeah. And also the beautiful part about this is once, for example, we would work on the same project, right?
Yes.
Like on the same branch, I can do my things and I can start working on them, and I can commit the changes, and push them so that you can even then.
Yeah, well, let's say we were talking first about
but
like
that's what I mean. That's
local environments, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
if we have the local environment, you're working by yourself.
Exactly.
And then as soon as we introduce the hosting solutions like GitHub, GitLab, or in our case,
okay. So as soon as you have remote, let's say,
you have remote repositories, that's when the fun begins, which is because you start sharing your work with other people, and everyone is working together in the same files. So basically what happens is that your Git repository is now, let's say, hosted in one of these solutions, and everyone has access to it, and everyone can pull changes from it. And now that you have multiple people working on it, the way that the Git magic does it is that, like Jack was saying, we can both work on the same files without being afraid of erasing or deleting other people's work, because Git will keep track of all the changes. And as soon as Jack commits something and pushes it to the remote repository, then I will see that there was something changed. And before I can make a push, I will need to pull his changes. So, and then locally Git will try to merge those changes. If there's ever issues,
you need to do it yourself.
There might be, then you have to fix them yourself. So the Git will facilitate that. It will show you, like, here we've automatically merged these things, and these are the things we were not able to merge. So please look at them and fix it.
Yep.
So what usually happens is maybe you deleted something in the file that he didn't delete. So it might show there like, or that he changed something in there and you deleted it.
Yep.
So now it says like, oh, this is what it looks like in the
This has been deleted.
original
want to
file,
keep them?
and this is
Yeah.
what it looks like in your file. What do you want to do? Do you want to keep your changes? Do you want to keep their changes? Do you want to keep both changes?
Yep.
Or I think those are
No, that's like those two things.
But
yeah.
So again, it's just a facilitator to collaborate on text files. So
Yeah.
it doesn't even need to be programming. It can just be any
definitely.
text file, and Git will keep track of it.
It even works with PNG, so like with pictures, so you can literally do everything you want.
It works with PNGs, but then you can't really have like a.
No, definitely. Let's say it does not make
more
sense.
Efficient. It's more efficient and more logical to use
Yeah.
it with text files. So any kind of text file doesn't need to be programming, but
It's true.
It's usually programming.
But it's basically file based, right? So
Yeah.
Git doesn't distinguish between text files or all your files that you have in your repositories. It's more about, is this file changed or is the content of the file changed?
Yeah, and what changed and
what
how
changed,
it changed.
exactly.
Who changed it? That's also
changed
another interesting thing.
That is
because-
basically something very essential, by the way, in software engineering, because if you come down to points where you have a lot of code and code coming in on a daily basis
From a bunch of
from a
different
bunch of people,
you don't know who did what.
yeah.
So,
And that's the beauty. That's step 2 probably before we go out into the whole collaboration aspect a bit more. But what I really love about it is that you can see line by line who committed these changes.
Yeah. What's the file history?
What's
like,
the file
who
history?
did what in
Yeah.
which part of the file, and so on.
So you can literally go to the line that you need and you can spot, okay, Eduardo pushed this yesterday at, I don't know, 2 a.m.
Yeah.
Okay, 2 a.m. is probably not right, but like 2 p.m. I can ask him, right?
Yeah, like,
why did you do that?
Why did you do this? Like,
yeah.
So
It's very
and the
helpful.
funny thing is that the command, like if you use it in the terminal, it's actually called git blame, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, not necessarily blaming people, but it's a funny thing that the command is called git blame. But
Exactly. And you can just blame people for their pushes.
exactly.
But yeah,
Let's say this is the very basic.
It's the introduction.
Yeah.
Why do you use it? How does it work on a very entry level?
Yep.
And now we would probably have to talk about the part which is more important in teams or in, let's say, collaborative work, which is the aspect of having a structured approach to the let's say
the workflow.
the workflow of
Having branches,
projects and branches.
like how to manage your deployment, because this also helps you a lot with the whole
Correct.
deployment side of things, like what is available to who at what point.
Mhm.
So
And there's several, let's say, approaches to that, right?
Yep.
One that I always send out is the one from, I think, the Git workflow. I think it's literally called, from Atlassian.
yeah, they have some guides in there. Yeah.
They have some guides, and this is basically the one that we also follow. And let's just start by the first, probably the general approach to this, right? Like, why do you need such an collaborative approach, and why does everybody need to know how to use it? Because, as we said, like if you start locally, or if you just use Git with another person, it's not that difficult because you can still talk. But as soon as it goes out to a team of 100 plus people, this mechanism, or like this way of writing and producing code, needs to be completely automated to a point where people know a process that they have to follow, right? So if I need to develop something, if I need to fix something, I need to adhere to a certain process. And that's basically where this Git workflow will facilitate this process. And how it works is basically that you have, let's say, several stages. Exactly. So you have a development branch, a branch for your testing, like a staging branch, basically, maybe even how do you call that? Like a branch in between, like a acceptance test branch, and last but not least, the production one, right? Like the live code, basically.
I think we can start by first explaining what branches are.
And that's exactly what, that's yeah.
Would you like me to do that?
Do that.
Right. So let's say, like we were saying, in the Git history, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you have, let's say, all your changes committed and so on, This is all considering that you're working in a single branch.
Yep.
And the way that this works, and the way it's the reason why it's called branch, is because you can think of it as like a tree,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you have the, let's say, the root where you start from. So everyone starts from the same origin.
Mm-hmm.
But what can happen is that, let's say, people want to work in separate things at the same time. And while it can be possible, like it is possible to work
Yeah.
together on the same branch, it's not the most efficient, because then, like Jack was saying, the workflow gets a bit more convoluted.
Mm-hmm.
So if, let's say, if you're trying to follow the more usual way of using these source control tools, the way it works is that generally you have, like he was saying, these different branches, and they all represent different stages of development or
Mm-hmm.
different stages of availability. So, for example, the dev branch would be something that we have
Mm-hmm.
as, let's say, the initial state, right? That all the developers are working on, and where the latest changes are currently being built,
Correct.
right? Then you have the staging branch, which is, let's say, derived from the dev branch,
Mm-hmm.
but at a point in time where all the changes there are, let's say, like secure, but then they're also being made available in this staging environment where people can internally, or a certain limited group of people can access it to run it and test it.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is that the staging branch will mimic the production environment so that it's as closely.
It's one step before production, basically.
Yeah, but it's supposed to mimic it in a way that it will, anything that causes issues in staging would also cause issues in production.
Correct.
So that you can identify them one step earlier and fix them before
Yep.
you go, let's say, full live.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there's the last one, which is the production branch, which is the one that is being made available to, let's say, for example, your customers or whoever is.
No, it's live code, basically.
It's live.
It's the code that you will find.
If you're hosting a web application, it would be the code that you would find it if you go to their
Correct.
website.
Yeah.
So let's say that's the idea, that you have these different stages where you can you have different, let's say, behaviors, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're working differently. But let's say, furthermore, besides these three, what happens usually is that on the dev side, since it's like the more interacted one, right? So it's the one that people mostly interact with.
Yep.
What happens is that you can have, for example, people in the same team working on separate branches
Mm-hmm.
within the dev branch itself. So let's say the dev branch is the single source of truth, let's say, and two people can be working in two different functionalities.
Yeah.
So, for example, Jack is building the dashboard and I'm building the side menu, whatever. And let's say we're both working from the dev branch, but instead of us both committing to it and let's say
corrupting code
left and right every time we make changes, what we can do is we can both separate ourselves from the dev branch into our own branches, right? And let's say that Jack will be working in one branch, I will be working in the other, and we will be in those branches until our feature is finalized. So
Correct.
Again, it's more encapsulation. So like we said before with the commits are sort of encapsulation. The branches are the bigger form of it.
Yep.
So if the feature you're working on is a bit bigger, it will require probably multiple commits. So you can think of the branch as like the larger group of commits that you're also separating yourself from, so that you will work on your branch until that feature is finalized. And then once it is finalized, you can just merge it back in.
Yep.
So you will get all your changes at once, but they're still organized in a way that there is a history.
Correct.
Which you can track and you can go back to, let's say, easily.
Yep.
So the idea is that, for example, if I work on this feature separately, as soon as I merge it, all my changes are done in one go. And if I realize, oh, there's something wrong or something is bad with this implementation, we would like to remove it, we can just remove that one single instance of the merge.
Yep.
Whereas if you had all these changes, all the history of your changes in the same branch, if you wanted to revert it, you would have to revert everything all the way back to the point where you started, which would probably cause you to lose a lot of work that was done in between by other people.
Not only that, but I think it's also in some aspects impossible because, again, small teams, sure.
Of course.
Big teams, it's just frequency of code, which just will break your head or your neck probably more. Because what is happening here is, like as Eduardo said, if you have usually major features that you're building on, or even smaller features, you branch out, which means, like you create a copy from that branch, right?
Yeah.
And if you work on it, you also are probably changing up the database structure. You are probably also changing up project structure in code, right? So you literally touch important things that would
That are
kill the
shared across the
progress
application.
that are shared, yeah, but that will also kill the progress of the others, right?
Yeah.
Because if you would start changing and screwing with the file structure, and I would, try to do something on my computer, like in my branch, and suddenly I get a lot of errors, it's also very hard for other people to work alongside you. Whereas if you would finish it in one go, right? So you branch out, 2 weeks later, you're done, you merge in, you have like a clear quality cut,
Yeah.
right? And that clear quality cut is basically removing all that friction that you would have
Because
working on the same source.
you had all the issues on your own and you
Correct.
didn't interact. Like, of course, there can be multiple people working on separate branches. That's not the point. But the idea
No.
is that this compartmentalization
Yep.
reduces the friction that people would have if everyone was working in the same branch.
Exactly.
And then again, since you have everything encapsulated in this one branch out and merge in,
Yep.
you can more easily control when this happens. Of course, if you want to revert back to things, you can always know like, this is where we merged, so remove this and then continue with the stuff that we had.
Correct.
So it's just a tool to facilitate, let's say, interactions between people working in the
and
same
managing code
basis.
And I think also where this comes in very handy is for, let's say, this is the happy place, right? Like you develop, everything is nice.
Yeah.
Maybe, if there's insignificant bugs, all good, right? Like you can branch out, fix the bug, and 2 weeks later, or however many weeks later, it will be in production, all good, right? But there are also times and places where you have severe issues in production. And when that happens, that is, first of all, not very nice, but usually you really can't get around it, right? Even the biggest companies sometimes have these things. And the real big positive part about this whole workflow approach with, for example, for Atlassian, it gives you also the freedom of managing this code and hot fixing things. So meaning you can go into the production branch, which issue you have to solve usually, and then you can derive again like another copy and you can patch it. Exactly. Yeah. So what does that mean usually, right? So what Eduardo explained to you on this dev branch, you can also do with the production branch.
You can do with all the branches you want. Yeah.
Correct. So you can branch out, you fix or like you hot fix that thing, right? Like that important bug. You can merge it back into the production branch after testing, of course. And you can release it or like quickly release it to cover up.
Without necessarily having to go through the whole process from dev to staging to production. So if it's something critical that you need to have fixed.
Correct.
Let's say on the final end.
Yep.
It is possible to do.
And then you can also, then again, merge back, right? So you can have a controlled outcome in the end there where you can say, okay, like the changes that I applied to this branch can be recited or revisited back to the development branch, introduced so that, it comes back into the same.
It can flow both ways, right?
Correct.
The same way that it flows from the dev to all the way to the production, let's say final endpoint. It can also come back.
It shouldn't, but
But
in these cases, let's say it's very handy to have because otherwise you will not have a nice life. Let's say like this as a software developer.
I mean, the ideal scenario is that, of course, everything starts in development and ends in production and follows the whole process through. Mm-hmm. But you can ask any company out there and they will tell you of that one time or the other time where something broke and then like they had to fix it and there was no way to, so.
And last but not least, which I would like to also mention is the importance or the nice way about adding releases to that, right? So once you are done, you can you move it to production, you give it like, let's say the last check. And once you have done that and everything is good, everything is fine, you can not only, version your images, which you should also do, by the way, but that's probably also another topic.
Different topic, yeah.
But the nice thing about it is that you can actually version that production code bases on that time and tag it. Exactly. So what tagging is basically just for the users a fancy term of creating another branch kind of, which is stale.
It's to marking. It's not necessarily. It is creating another branch, but it's
like a stale branch, basically.
A way
Let's
of
say it like this.
marking this like this current instance of the application as this version, and then
Correct.
you can easily control like which versions are in use, which versions are deprecated.
And the best part about it is you have a documentation of like what you have introduced in this release, right? So which fixes come in, which features are there, maybe also in which part of the applications and who did what, with the change log in there, right?
Yep.
And that is something that a lot of companies, I think, okay, maybe that's over exaggerated, but let's say that I know of some places that don't do that, and that can cause a lot of headaches around what you have done as a
It's harder
team.
to control.
Yeah, because we can, for example, just go into our Discord or wherever, because I mirror these changes also.
Yeah.
So I see literally what we have done.
So this new version has
For
been
every
released.
release.
These things have been added to it. These things have been fixed.
Yeah.
And so on, so forth. So.
And it gives clarity not only to us, but also to the product owners, to the customers. So wherever we want to share this information with, by the way, my voice is getting raspy, but you will always see it, right? So you will always see and know what happens. It's linked to that version, and it's basically just like a nice round off for the whole management of the code side. Yeah, it's like a nice circle of life in code that you can complete. And always be sure that you can revert things. Like you said, you always know what happened.
Yeah.
And who did it, by the way.
Yeah, of course.
So,
yeah.
Yeah. And I think
I was going to introduce a new quick one, which is the fact that Git is also very handy to work. Let's say this whole workflow of like dev, staging, production, and let's say how do you call it, like weekly deployments, or there's like a fancier term for it. I forgot. Like
deliveries,
continuous delivery, right? So this whole process is facilitated by Git.
Yeah.
So it fits very nicely with the agile methodology that basically every company uses.
Yeah, well, that is basically because it comes from there. So.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So it's like a really, chicken and the egg thing, right? Who came first? But it's a nice integration with the real world, right? So.
And I think that already will step into the whole advanced topic of it, right? So why would you, how do you say it? How you can continue on it, and how you can automate a lot of things around Git with Git to save you a lot of time, but also to, how should I say it, like to remove a lot of manual labor that you would usually do by triggering all these processes behind that, right? So what we mean by that is obviously like the whole CI/CD thing, meaning continuous integration, continuous development in the IT terms, which means that once you trigger certain pushes to certain branches, you can also configure immediately to run certain builds. And for the people that, let's say, are
basically clicking the install button.
It's clicking the install button so that 5 minutes later you will see it on your server running with the newest configuration, with the newest,
So let's say to simplify, the process would go like you create this if condition. So if something happens, something else should trigger.
Yep.
And by using CI/CD with Git, what you can do is like once someone pushes to this branch, trigger this build process. So like click this install button.
Yeah.
And then once that is finished, you know for certain that your build finished and the thing that you just pushed is already available, or whatever thing else you might be doing with it. But you let's say don't have to think about what you're doing because it's already integrated there. And it's already implemented. So it facilitates in the whole automation process of the deployment and integration of everything. So
that's true. Yeah. All right.
I think that's fair amount of information.
I do so too, because I do still have a lot of more topics, but I guess for now it's already a nice wrap for this podcast.
For this episode.
Yeah, sorry. I'm under caffeinated today, guys, and didn't have the coffee that I used to. But
That's true. The brain
anyway,
is.
yeah, the brain is highly decaffeinated.
Yeah.
It's lacking the caffeine to patch up the adenosine receptors. So that is just never. It's a deadly,
All right. So
Anyway, people,
you know what to do.
definitely like,
Subscribe.
share,
Leave a comment.
ring the bell,
Oh yes, the YouTube bell, the malicious bell
the malicious bell.
that everyone is required to click. Otherwise, YouTube doesn't do its job properly.
Yep.
It's incredible.
And Discord, obviously.
Oh yeah, check us out.
You guys should have a webhook. No, we will go into that later. But you guys should be pushed to go to our Discord and harass Eduardo.
Harass all of us.
All of us.
Or none. But just join our Discord.
Definitely.
And
then, thank you very much, Eduardo.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for listening.
See you next time.
See you next time.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.